this feels a little bit like a family reunion. And it's kind of great because some of the key junctures are forgotten thanks to what Jeremy White was just saying about the institutional memory being so fast. So I have one quick story from the Bush days. I cut my teeth working for Stanley as an intern in 1997 in the Clinton administration, and then worked for Brent Terrell at DOL. And the president used to gather these people together, the late David Quo, Jim Toohey, others, for these massive, this is how you can think about partnering with the government type conferences. They were huge. And he told a joke that I bet only 3 or 4 of you in this room remember. He used to say that there would be seasons, right, when a little church down in Louisiana would be gathered, not all that large, and the pastor would gather people together, and then they'd come, and somebody in the back row, middle of the sermon, who wasn't a regular part of the church, would stand up and say, "Use me, Lord, use me," and sit back down. And it was very awkward. But as people were leaving the church that day, the pastor said to her, "Listen, we've actually wanted to resand the pews and put some new paint on the walls. If you've got a little time this Wednesday or Thursday, we'd love to have you stop by." And a week goes by, and the following Sunday, the pastor was up there in the pulpit preaching away. And the very same person saunters into the church, and mid-sermon, she stands up and she says, "Use me, Lord, use me, but only in an advisory capacity." So his line was that, faith-based actors are not just advisors. All right, we have a wonderful panel for you. Adelle Banks first is a longtime journalist. She's been at the Religion News Service since 1997. Amazing. Here. And what a piece today. If you haven't seen it last night or this morning, what a piece on the arc of the faith-based initiative. If you haven't seen that yet, that's your homework. She is the project editor and a national reporter for RNS, where she covers religion, race, and the intersection of government and religious groups. She is an award-winning journalist. She's been at RNS all those many years and authored Becoming a Future-Ready Church. Dr. Stephanie Boddie is a professor in Waco. She is the associate professor at Baylor University, both at the seminary and at the undergraduate campus. She's a recognized expert on faith-based initiatives and addressing social justice. She's been a researcher at major universities, authored numerous books, articles on the role of faith in social challenges and community well-being. And Reverend Dr. Clifford Monrose, Gil Monrose, is a gun violence mitigation advocate. He's a community leader in Brooklyn, up New York, that is. He served as a faith advisor to Mayor Eric Adams, where over the course of, we're going to hear a little more about that time. Over the course of his career, he's founded nonprofit organizations committed to reducing violence and building bridges between communities, government, and law enforcement, including through some very interesting philanthropic work. So first, a question, friends, to all 3 of you, just going right down the line, starting with Adelle. Where'd you first hear about the White House Faith-Based Initiative? And as you reflect on it, what were your initial impressions, but also like 25 years later, how do you see the initiative's impact today?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's nice to be here and to hear the new and old stories. I've been a reporter for Religion News Service for 31 years, and I probably heard about this initiative or the idea when President Bush was not yet president, but was instead discussing his plans to be elected. And so I was thinking about that and figuring that's what it was. And I was trying to find proof of that. And I went back in the very old digital archives of RNS and proved myself right. And that is, in July of 1999, we had an item in our, what we then was a daily digest with the headline, "Candidate Bush Favors Grants Tax Credits to Help Charities." So it was part of his platform, and he spoke at a metro church in Indianapolis, and he said this: "In every instance where my administration sees a responsibility to help people, we will look first to faith-based organizations, charities, and community groups that have shown their ability to save and change lives." He said, "We'll make a determined attack on need by promoting the compassionate acts of others." So that item was a proof of where we in some ways are now. And he spoke about the effectiveness of religious groups and supporting prison inmates and drug addicted teens, some of the same things we've heard earlier today. And so that's really how it started for me is like, oh, okay, this is what he wants to do. And at that point, we didn't know he was going to be president and achieve some of that.
I learned about the faith-based initiative, I guess it was through my professor, Dr. John DeLulio. At the time, the faith-based initiative was developing. I was a student at University of Pennsylvania, and I had started studying congregations in our social and community services. I guess it was 1997 when I started my doctoral program. And so it's been really interesting for me to have heard about this work as a student, and then to really have the opportunity to be a part of a research team that was doing some of the initial work to understand how congregations were playing a role in faith-based social services. And as a student, I also then went on to work at the Annie Casey Foundation, where I got a different kind of perspective of how the faith-based initiative was working, because as has been mentioned before, foundations weren't necessarily in that space, and I had the opportunity to work on a research and development team for the Annie Casey Foundation with Carol Thompson for several years. And so that was also a very rich opportunity. And my unique perspective coming to this work is that I'm a preacher's kid. And so, you know, when you say this whole idea of a faith-based initiative, it's like faith-based initiative, this isn't a new term. We've been doing faith-based initiatives, making bricks out of straw. So really having to re-educate myself about how this national public-private partnership and the complexity of the public-private partnership was really a great re-education about how faith-based organizations can play a role at that table, at that national, state, and local table.
And good morning to everyone. Just so you know, I was praying for you that you landed well with that joke. So God bless you. And I wasn't in the restroom. But so yeah, when I moved to New York in 1999, you know, early 2000, I think when I started to work, went to Bible school and started to hear the idea about, you know, what we could do as a community. Some of the pastors who was working on immigration reform at that point in time and gun violence work was telling me about that the fact that, you know, you could get grants from the federal government. I was like, yeah, let's do it. It didn't work out, but that's the first time that I heard about the faith-based office.
And you know, there were sort of assumptions and suspicions in play, if I recall, in the early days, maybe a little bit less now, but still some now, as we've been hearing earlier. You know, I recall the late Mike Gerson describing how, as a reporter, when he was first in friendship, kind of like John, with the president of the governor of Texas, you know, there was a time when Bush was asked a question, and the reporter said, well, you know, why don't you comment on your opponent? You know, and he said, well, I don't want to comment on my opponent when I've maybe, you know, he's got a speck in his eye, but I may have a log in my own. And the New York Times journalist wrote down in the piece, we think this is something about the pot calling the kettle black. You know, not familiar, right, with this language. And you know, I think I saw E.J. Dionne here earlier, and I think he's still here now. But he will talk about you know, at the Pope's funeral, John Paul II, you know, went over to write a story. These misinterpretations because there would be a crow's ear, they said, next to him lying in rest. You know, not a crozier, but a crow's ear. That appeared in the New York Times. The BBC ran a piece saying that there were Carmelite nuns, Karma, space, L-I-G-H-T, nuns. You know, there was a lot to get over, right? You know, and I think EJ's comment at the time was that there's nothing but religion here. What are we going to write about? You know, said his co-reporter. You know, so there's been a bit of overcoming. What, if any, overcoming do you think had to happen in this initiative and maybe has?
I think there's always been a question and a fear amongst some and support amongst others. And just even the support of some would lead people to be suspicious. So, at the beginning, people like Chuck Colson was supporting President Bush's efforts. But then people at the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism questioned, well, what about the separation of church and state? And that has kind of continued through every administration. So that's been there and still is there.
I think to join with what Adelle is saying, I think the overcoming has also been once the policies began to change and the regulations also began to change, people really understanding what it meant for their particular context. So, for example, very recently in doing some interviews with a state faith-based organization in Texas, One Star, they have consistently been doing capacity building trainings since 2004 when their office was established. They have faith liaisons where they work with agencies work with faith-based and community organizations, and they try to get out into local communities as well. But the thing that he says he hears often is this perceived barriers. So these barriers may not exist in any policy or legislation, but there's still these perceived barriers. And this may simply be related to something that Jeremy brought up, this kind of historical amnesia, people really losing track of what has happened since 2001 and has continued to happen in terms of each faith-based office taking on the faith-based initiative and refining and reimagining it. And sometimes the faith-based initiatives sort of receding into the background with other things happening. I know for myself when I worked at the Pew Research Center, when the Obama administration was transitioning, we had such great hopes that we would hear all these things about the faith-based initiative, but we also know there was an economic crisis, there were wars. So these things sort of went to the foreground, and the faith-based initiative seemed to be in the background, even though the people who were out there doing the work know that it was continuing to go on. There was still work happening, but because there were things in the foreground. So I would say one of the challenges has been having to dig through and find out where this work is happening, given that there's so many things that are being pushed in the foreground that we hear about, that we see, but we may not know is happening. My colleague Hay Penn, who is here, I know that her work during the Obama administration, when they were trying to help people with foreclosures, her organization, Faith and Community Empowerment, was an organization that was engaged in doing that work. And in other administrations where we were looking at other issues, that information may not have been out there in the news. So again, we lost track of what was happening during the Trump administration. So thank you for some of the things that you've shared in the other panels. Then when we had the Biden administration, perhaps people were more aware of what was happening because agencies were closed. So where were people going for help? Oh, the faith-based organizations, the congregations. So maybe on the ground, people were hearing about that, but still not really knowing what's happening on the national level the way we just heard from Melissa Rogers and others. So I think how we get that information about what's happening in the faith-based organizations and the faith initiatives is often through people like Adelle and what they're reporting in the news, and how that information is also gets translated with those on the local level who actually understand what the current regulations and policies are and how they do apply for faith-based and community organizations.
Thank you. And I'll also talk about that too as well. So, how do you get even like a Republican administration and a faith-based community to be able to drill down in places like New York City, right? New York City, New York City. with faith-based work. A lot of story about that, but a lot of good things happening. And so sometimes, people come and say, "You live in New York City?" It's like, yeah, there's people to be saved in New York City too as well. And so it was never seen as a office that was supposed to be drilling down into these areas to us. We thought it was more of a Bible Belt type of office that was streamlined to, like the top 3 issues, not really dealing with maybe, gun violence for number 1, maybe health. No, we can't get fresh fruits and vegetables, what we call food deserts. You have, youth empowerment. The number 1 cause for African American who is killed, young men, is actually gun violence. That should be number 1, I would think. So we were thinking about, to us, like, how do we find ourselves as part of this new faith base? Are they leaving us out? Are we not faith enough? And so that was the challenge until I think up to with President Barack Obama. Joshua Dubois, of course, came to New York City, very much so centered to some of the Black clergy, Caribbean clergy within New York City. And then I think we started having that type of relationship. Michael Way's here as well, who kind of helped us to navigate what does that mean. For the first time, like 18 years ago, we took 120 pastors from Brooklyn, primarily to Washington, D.C., to the White House and the Capitol. And that was the first for us. So we never had a relationship with that type of level and power. So now you hear this faith-based office trying to figure out what would it take to be engaging with it. And I think over the years we have learned. I think we have some step backwards in this administration. I was telling the fellow who just spoke, David, I said, you should pray enough. You took me off the list. We used to come to the White House. What happened? But we need to really move from the idea that the faith-based office should be faith-based driven, mission driven, not party driven. And so therefore it means to say that if you have a prophetic voice in prophecy, it's never really good announcements being made in the Bible, right? It's always something that you don't want to hear. So that's why it's prophetic. It's saying to you that this is what it is. So to say that you have a prophetic voice, you don't have a conservative voice. You don't have a progressive voice. You have a prophetic voice, and that is different. And so your prophetic voice has to be that. It has to be prophetic. And so I think for as leaders and being faith-based, we have to recognize that there are some things that you're going to hear that God is saying, without saying, use me, Lord, just an advisory position, that it would be challenging to where we need to collaborate with folks who are, and leaders who are on the ground. So I think it have evolved, but I still think that it needs a lot of work now too as well to bring everybody into the fold.
It's great. It's great. Let's do one more each way, coming back this way. So starting with you, Gil, you said that in a way, traveling together breaks down some silos across faith communities, perhaps amongst clerical leaders. That were there any surprises for you for actually running this office within Eric Adams' administration? I mean, it's a place of power.
Right.
What were the main takeaways as you reflect back?
There's a lot. Can't tell you all of them, but there's a lot. But what I would say is that I think, not being biased, I think that Mayor Eric Adams was one of the, I would say, the most faith-driven mayor in America in its history. And I'll tell you why. Number one, he was raised in the church. Number two, his parents was very much so involved in ministry in the Kojic tradition. Number three, all throughout his life, faith-based was the one who kind of propelled him to where he landed as the mayor. And then number three, I don't know what number I'm on, but I spent 8 years running the same faith office while he was the borough president. So I've been with him for 12 years doing the same thing. And one of the things that people don't realize about New York City is that we're very diverse, but it's also a religious city too as well. Don't read everything you read, don't believe, about New Yorkers, all right? There's some good, safe people in New York. Can I get an amen? And so what we saw is that it was a challenge about having a progressive city like New York. How do you intertwine the faith-based initiative to be able to help? Well, I want to say to you, all of you, on every block in New York City, in the Bronx, If you go to Church Avenue, there's a street called Church Avenue because there's a church on every street, not only one, sometimes two, sometimes three of them stuck together, but they don't speak to one another. And so Brooklyn was called the borough of churches. And so you had the Sikh community, you had the largest Jewish community outside of Israel. And so we had to navigate the complexity of those. And our job was to make sure that, number one, that everyone has access to the resources of New York City. And they had access also to the voice of the mayor as well, so that when there was issues that needed to be dealt with, that we would speak on those things. And it was also good too because, we had a direct line between the mayor and myself. We didn't have someone in between. So the faith community was very much so blessed to be able to have that type of office in play.
It's wonderful. It's great. And then Dr. Boddie, you mentioned Casey and Pew, your research over the years. I'd just be curious to ask if there's perhaps like an unknown area or an unknown story or some research area that you think, from seeing a lot over the decades, is underreported, an untold story that you think more Americans should know about.
There's so many, I think there's so many untold stories, but one I'll focus on today is many of us here, we know about the faith-based initiative starting in Texas with then Governor Bush. And I just shared a little bit about the One Star Foundation that started under his Lieutenant Governor, Rick Perry, in 2004. And so they have the state infrastructure. But what I found to be interesting is the city that I live in, Waco, we just started a faith-based initiative in 2023 under that current mayor, Dillon. And they've started to have lunch and learns and an annual conference. There's also in San Antonio a pretty robust faith-based initiative, which I learned from Ben Odell. Their faith-based initiative was established in 2017. It's run out of their Department of Health and Human Services in tandem with a Compassion City initiative, where they have been able to create this hybrid model and really listen to the community, address some really important issues like generational poverty, immigration and refugee, literacy, mental health. And during the pandemic, they were able to really do what so many other service providers were trying to do. They were using technology to reach the people who needed the help the most. And so they created this directory called Sacred, which they have said is even more powerful than like 211 or other services through United Way, where they're able to curate 3,000 services where they are helping to connect service providers with their citizens. And they've also been able to bring together people of faith or no faith at all because of this Compassion Center aspect of their work, which prioritizes the golden rule. And so I thought when I interviewed Ann Helmke from San Antonio, this is such an interesting model. But I go to my own home city and they never heard of it. And when I started interviewing other people that Ben Odell had also directed me to, one of the things I heard over and over was how grateful they were for Ben for having these meetings where people could join and talk about what's happening in their state government, what's happening on their local government, to really learn from each other. But we need so much more of that so that we don't keep recreating the wheels or forgetting what has happened. So thank you for that question.
You guys for organizing. And then Adelle, you've been covering this for a long time, from before the thing was even born. Do you see a big idea? Do you see a most compelling theme that maybe is, again, being missed, or that should be more broadly aware in the mainstream press or otherwise, that you would offer to us?
don't know about one big idea, but I will say that there are times when people wonder how you can have faith groups and government work together. And excuse me, I think one of the best examples is one that Melissa Rogers raised, and that was with the COVID pandemic. Not only the ways people ended up having to be online instead of in person, but coordinating with congregations to do, as she said, have these pop-up clinics, et cetera. I think that one instance was when President Biden visited a seminary in Virginia Theological Seminary, and their chapel was converted into a clinic. And the dean said, our chapel is continuing to share the gospel in this season, although it is taking a slightly different form. And so I think that that was an example where you saw how the two could work together when people thought that they might not otherwise. And I think when people even see that picture of like President Biden in that chapel, seeing what was going on and talking about it later and how it was really helping the country because people were doing the helping of the neighbor in a very specific way. I think that maybe brought it home to people in ways that people who normally wouldn't understand this initiative at all were able to understand.
Wonderful. And then maybe an exit question is just to ask, one view is that because faith-based organizations bring heart, they have local institutions, they have volunteers, plus they believe, that they should get more money. And another view is that government has a legitimate task. It's supposed to provide for public task, public function, and faith communities have a legitimate task. And sometimes there should be a partnership, but sometimes not. And I wonder if you have any final, maybe cautionary word that complicates the narrative, that just says, really, God is on the side of faith-based organizations en masse, and so they should definitely get more money, for goodness sakes, in these times. What can you? Well, all right. Bring us home.
Bring us home. Give us all the money. We'll do the job. The thing is that, right, I think is also hypocritical as well. Even if we're saying that we're a country built on God and we're a country, President Ronald Reagan says that, if we're not a country under God, we shall be a country going under. But in New York City, we have about $400 billion between the state and New York City. We spend $7 billion in the migrant crisis. I put $24 million to House of Worship to, house migrants, to give them food. We thought about using them as they had connection. We did $1.5 million in gun violence to houses of worship to do work in their communities. There was so many affordable housing. Faith communities are, to me, the best place to give the money that's not the government back to the people. True faith-based communities. I think that the work that is being done, food pantries, soup kitchens, after-school programs, you could have a religious person running it, and it's quote-unquote secular, and then we're fine with that. But if we have just the same organization running, and it's considered to be faith-based, then there's a problem. So I think that we need to figure out what we want to be. Do you want to be a country that highlights that all of us are equal in the fact that we can do good work? I never hear people saying, well, we don't want to give Salvation Army money or the Red Cross or Harvard University. All these were theological schools and they were religious at some point in the beginning. But I do think that we need to pivot to the fact that let's realize that government can't do everything and we need our partners. And I would push to say, we need to fund those groups of faith-based groups, not just the ones that is popular, but the one that is doing real work in their particular communities that sometimes we miss because they're so low. They're not even grassroots, they're soil-based, right? Like I tell people, my ministry, we're so low that we're soil-based. We don't even have grasses yet. Give us the energy, give us the nutriments and the resources to grow, not weeds, to grow grass, to be able to compete. So hopefully we get there. I think that we're moving in the right direction. And with all of you lovely people in the room, I think we're definitely going to do a good job together. Thank you.
What I would say is that how can we better understand what different types of faith groups can bring to faith-based initiatives, because different groups may have different strengths, they may have different networks. One thing we do know is that they bring a strong relational infrastructure. So how does that help us to really reach and access people who need help, people who might be the most vulnerable, who might fall through the cracks with these other types of services? And I see that in understanding the faith-based initiative, as a person who has been both in academia and also in the philanthropic sector, I see great opportunities that I've learned from my teacher here, Dr. Lulio, that the universities, that the higher education has a strong role to also play in being a bridge in helping to translate this information from the government to the state and local entities so that they can understand it in a way to activate and mobilize their work, as well as to understand what is happening and to capture these stories, to conduct this research so that we can better inform government officials about what's happening out there in the religious landscape and how they can better partner and understand the diversity of the work that faith-based and community-based organizations are doing. And then similarly with the philanthropic sector. What is the philanthropic sector? How are they working? How has their role transformed through this era of 25 years of the faith-based initiative? And what lessons can we learn from that sector that can better help us to strengthen our public-private relationships? So coming at it from an academic perspective and also having been in the philanthropic sector, I think that bringing all of these perspectives together could really help us to better inform the sector so that as we think about what we have learned over 25 years of the faith-based sector, we also think about how have these various sectors been transformed and strengthened, or where are the gaps that we can continue to strengthen these various sectors so that we have a stronger civil society in general.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'll just add that 2 words have stuck out to me today that has been spoken, and those are trust and access. And I think that what she just spoke about related to access, having more groups be able to know that they can be connected with a faith-based initiative is something that maybe some people don't really realize. But I will also point out that experts like Stanley have said that over time, the offices, whether they are Republican or Democratic, have used these networks, these faith-based networks, not just to support faith organizations and community organizations, but also to help educate people about whatever the agenda is of the president who happens to be in office. So I think that's an example of how there are multiple benefits from this work, but also pitfalls because people might lose trust if they feel like the access they're getting isn't so much to help them, but to help the government.
Adelle Banks, Stephanie, Boddie, and Gil Monrose, thank you very much. It's great.